I'm not the speaker.
Oh, sorry.
No, not yet.
I'll wait.
When most people, for those of you who don't know, the word Rebbe means rabbi. And if you refer to the Rebbe, most people envision an old man, very old man with a black hat and a very big beard. That's the Rebbe. Our speaker today is not old. He doesn't have a black hat. He doesn't have a beard. But what he's going to teach you is something like what most rabbis do. And rabbi, by the way, is the word for teacher. And what a rabbi does is he teaches you things that make you want to think. They give you a different perspective about things. The avian rabbi teaches Jewish wisdom seen in the beauty of birds. Eric Eisenstein will be speaking about service and the ways that we self-define our own contributions. Perspective is the key and can be challenging to discern. I can't wait to hear Eric because I've met Eric through the synagogue. I did a video for the synagogue and interviewed Eric, and he's a fascinating guy. And this is a take on things that you have never heard before. So please, let's give a warm Rotary Club welcome to Eric Eisenstein.
Get in there,
Beautiful, thank you.
maybe.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Full disclosure, Mike is right. I do not have a black hat nor a beard. I'd like to think I'm not old. I'm also not a rabbi. I am not ordained. I cannot bury you. I cannot marry you. I can't do any of that. But I will tell you in a minute about kind of the funny little story as to how I got the job title. So today, what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes talking about how the Avian Rebbe got started, because I dare say that I'm the first Avian Rebbe you've ever met, certainly the first one I've ever met. And then what we're going to do is we're going to learn together. I'm going to take you through kind of a fun little lesson where we talk about service, and we're going to learn a little bit of Hebrew, a word or two. And then most importantly, I'd like to have a discussion, a little bit of Q&A, but really a discussion. This entire presentation will live or die by the degree to which y'all are invested and interested and ask tough questions, mostly of yourselves. So let me pause there. Any comments or questions before we get started? Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask Jen if you would please put up the first slide. And we'll talk about this little bird in a moment. But look at the date. It's March 19th, 2022. And that was kind of a special day for me. That's about 2 years to the day before I got started. And so the very first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you to do something terribly unpleasant. You ready? Turn your clocks back in your head to March 19th, 2020. All right? Yeah. That was a lousy day. There were a whole lot of lousy days right around then. They started about a month before that, and of course they went on for, call it a year and a half subsequently, and in some measures still going on. But I want to take you back to February-ish, March of 2020. My best friend lived in Hong Kong at the time, had for some years. We talked daily, and I'd been aware that this COVID thing that nobody really understood yet was coming. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to deal with it, but I did know, I could tell in my gut that we were going to be alone and we were going to be outside. And that was going to be our future for the foreseeable future. Not so great. So what I did, on the advice of another friend of mine who'd been pushing me for quite some time, was I went out and bought a camera, the first adult camera I'd ever had. And I thought, man, what's easier than taking bird pictures? Well, everything. So I took my camera that I got delivered to the house about 4 days before everything shut down. And remember when all the non-essential stores were closed in March of 2020? Precision Camera brought me a camera, and I started going to the parks every single morning. And it was my way of staying sane, frankly. It was my therapeutic outlet. It was my opportunity to remind myself that as horrible as COVID was and as awful as this plague was in killing everyone, there were some things that were going to continue. And the things that were going to continue were the things that I saw out at the park. Every day the sun came up, and every morning the birds sang. And every day I had the opportunity to walk and think and focus on the things that mattered. And that's what I did every day. So it was the kind of thing that I started jotting down on Facebook. I would take my little thoughts in a photo or two, and I'd say something kind of funny, little black humor, and I'd put it up on Facebook. And after a few weeks, I got a call from my rabbi, and he said, "Eric, will you do something for me?" And I said, "Yes." "What?" And he said, "I'd like you to start on our Friday night Zooms teaching." I said, "Teaching what?" And he said, "The things you're doing is the avian Rebbe." And I said, "Okay, I'm in." So 92 weeks later, this is what I do. Twice a week, I take a photo, I write about it, I publish it, and here I am speaking to Rotary clubs, to business groups, to schools, churches, synagogues, all kinds of groups, and I'm loving it, having an absolute ball. So what I want to do today is take you through a little lesson about service and about how we can think about ourselves that's informed by the natural world and the divine that we see. Ready? All right. March 19th, 2022. Good day for me. I got invited. Who knows the Austin American Statesman?
Oh, yeah.
All right, good. Y'all know Michael Barnes?
Yeah.
Good. Michael reached out and said, "Hey, has the Statesman told the story of the avian Rebbe?" And I said, "Not yet." And he said, "Great, we'd love to tell your story." So Michael and I met out at Commons Ford Park, which is out off of Cuernavaca, out west of town. And we spent a few hours looking at birds together, talking. And he wrote a beautiful profile and he published it in the Statesman. I was really excited about it. And after I'd finished up this great morning, you know, Michael Barnes, come on. I saw this bird in a tree out at Commons Ford. And I want to talk about that photo a little bit because I think it's kind of an interesting opportunity to teach. So what do you see? Bird on a branch. What else do you see?
Tree.
Tree, yeah, covered with lichen. It's really kind of beautiful. Beg your pardon? No, sir, that's lichen. Lichen. What else do you see?
Depth of field. Depth of field.
Yes? What don't you see?
COVID.
COVID, yeah. The sky. What's the bird doing?
Not saying.
Not singing. What's he done? I'll give you a hint. There's a woman bird a few yards just behind him. It's March. What's he doing? He is showing off. That's exactly right. So it's March. It's the spring. His mate is just a few yards away in a bluebird box. And what he's doing is he's perched out in the middle of the field hunting. And the reason that I have the photo cropped in like this, and it's very tightly cropped, is precisely so that you don't have the context. Okay? If you look at that photo, it might be a little hard. You can pick up the snapshot. That might make it a little bit easier. You'll see that in the zoomed in photo like this, you can see a whole lot of detail. The snapshot probably will reveal the detail a little bit better. You'll see the detail, and you'll see that, frankly, it's a beautiful photograph. It's an especially beautiful bird, but you don't have any context. You don't know what he's doing or why he's doing it, or any of the other things that give meaning to the what is the beauty of the bird? And so taken out of context like that, stripped of its meaning, it's really kind of hard to understand what's going on. And that's really important when looking at something like this. What's it mean? Because otherwise you're just looking at something pretty. When you start to talk about what it means, now you've got something that's rich. That's what I want to talk about this afternoon, pardon me. So here we are, March 19th, I'm looking at this bird. And I start thinking about why is he sitting there and why is he doing what he's doing? And what does it tell us about what we do? So I promised y'all that I would teach you a little word of Hebrew. And that word is avodah. Okay? Avodah is one of those fun words in Hebrew that's got a bunch of different meanings depending on how you use it. It's kind of like shalom or aloha. Wait, not aloha. Aloha has a lot of meanings. It's not a Hebrew word. So, all right. Avodah, what does it mean? So it means service. That's kind of the general way to think about it. I figured that speaking about that word to this audience ought to resonate just a touch. So let's talk about different ways that that word is used. Everybody is familiar with the story of the Israelites, slaves in Egypt. You've either read the book or seen the Cecil B. DeMille movie. Everybody knows that one? All right, good. The Israelites are described in terms of avodim. It means slaves. They are in service to Pharaoh. And avodah later in biblical and Talmudic tradition refers to the service that is offered in the Holy Temple. So when you sacrifice an animal on the altar, that is avodah. If you were to go to Israel today and talk to somebody and say, what do you do for a living? And they talk about their work, the word is avodah. And there are some people, you'll find them typically wearing black hats. They might have big white beards, and they're going to speak of avodah as kind of, well, in non-Jewish tradition, you know the word servant leadership, right? This concept of being in service to something higher. It is kind of an interesting take on, I won't say slavery, but giving up some of your own free will, some of your own volition to be in service to a higher cause. I think it's a situation that, again, putting language aside, resonates with many of us. It's kind of an interesting way to look at that word. So I've given you 4 different meanings of the word avodah. Now you can brag to your friends when you go home. You can ask them if they know what avodah means. With those 4 meanings, the thing that's common, of course, is this idea of service, being in service to somebody else. And it can be terrible service, like being a slave, or it can be sublime service, like being able to give of yourself to a greater cause. That's the kind of meaning that we define, that we use in the context of choosing a word, how we want it to mean. What way do we look at our words? What way do we look at ourselves? What way do we look at our actions? And as we transition kind of into this next stage, I'd like you to be thinking about, what does your work mean? What does your work mean? So let's talk about that. I'm going to look at my watch to make sure I got plenty of time for us. When we look at this bird, what's it doing? It's providing food to its mate. She's back at the box. It's spring. So he's hunting up worms and such to bring back to his mate to create the next generation. That's pretty good service. That's pretty good service. That's about as good as it gets. What are we doing? So think about the work that you do, or think about the work that you know that others do. And let's talk about it for a minute. So it's really easy, particularly in the context of, let's call it February, March 2020, when we started to learn the words essential workers. Remember that? Yeah. It's really easy to look at folks and say, well, they've got what I consider to be a low status job, or they don't make a whole lot of money. And so I bet that their life just isn't so great. That's easy to say. Ask a school teacher. Ask a soldier. I bet you'd get a different perspective. I mentioned earlier in my day job, I work for an inventor licensing patents. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a business guy by background. But I work with a bunch of lawyers, and I work with a bunch of financial people, and I work with a bunch of what I would consider to be very high status, ridiculously overpaid people. And many of them, despite having big houses and fat bank accounts, don't have a sliver of meaning in their lives. Nothing. Are they rich? Are they powerful? Maybe. Are they impoverished? Yes. And what I would suggest when we look at their work, all of our work, is that we get to define the context of it. So a school teacher or an investment banker can be a wonderful human being. They can be a lousy human being. We read about them in the papers. But the point is that merely because you have this or you do that doesn't provide the context. The context comes from how we expand our view, how we enlarge the depth of field, how we zoom out a little bit more to understand what a bird does. That's where it starts to become clear where the value is. It's not enough just to say, I've got this job title, I went to this school, I did all the right things. Lots of those folks have done it. I sit next to them all the time, and it's empty. And I'm very fortunate to also sit next to folks that maybe haven't had, shall we say, the opportunities, but end up with a life that's rich and full and meaningful. And sitting in a room like this, I'm talking to a self-selected audience, people who are making the extra effort to imbue not only their own lives, but the lives of the community around them with that kind of meaning. It's a real honor. So what I would suggest is that as we look at the things that matter to us, as we look at the things that we see that perhaps we recognize, perhaps we don't, we stop and pause for a minute. And we understand that even if we don't see the full context, there is a story there. Maybe what we need to do is zoom out a little bit. Maybe what we need to do is focus in a little tighter. Because seeing that bird, you know, it's the detail and the closeness that makes it beautiful. And it looks beautiful. But without understanding the full context in which it's living and in which it's operating, you start to, you fail to recognize exactly what it is that imbues it with meaning. So I'm going to close today the way that I close every talk that I give. And I'm going to invite y'all to participate in some questions and some answers, probably more questions than answers. But what I would suggest, like I always do, is be grounded, fly high. Thank you very much.
Question. What's the prettiest bird that you've ever photographed?
You know, this one's pretty close. Every bird that I see brings something a little bit different. Some are remarkable by virtue of their color. Some are regal. We were talking about the crested caracara earlier today. And then there are birds that you see in flight, and all of us want to fly. It's actually kind of fun. I wrote about it in the book. If you do a survey and you ask 100 people, what superpower would you have? Overwhelmingly, 90%, 95%, people say, I want to be able to fly. And if you ask what is meaningful about birds, and you ask it in ancient China or ancient Greece or ancient Central America or today, it's always flight. Think about a dragon. It's a winged snake. You see it in Central America, you see it in China. The story of Icarus is the man who wants to fly. The Holy Ark, the angels that we see are little children, cherubs, and they always have wings. Everything that we see that is divinely inspired, I suppose, has wings on it, because we all want to be able to fly. Yes, sir.
Do you have a favorite bird?
I'm pretty fond of American kestrels. And there's one on the cover of the book, actually. I invite you to come up and take a look. I just think it's the smallest. I mean, that's beautiful. Look at that. It's the smallest falcon in North America, and the coloring is beautiful, and the way they fly is very, very elegant, and they screech nicely. It's just a bird I like. Yeah.
And they're local?
Yes, sir. They're here. I wrote a piece once. I live over in Northwest Hills, and I wrote a piece called Life is Looking Up. I was walking just a neighborhood street, Northwest Hills, and I happened to have my camera around my neck. And normally I'm looking for kids on bikes or, cars coming at me, that kind of thing. And I happened to just look up, and I saw a kettle, it's called. That's a flock of American white pelicans. Huge. In Northwest Hills. And I was brand new to birds, and I immediately went home and I let Audubon know that, there were pelicans in Northwest Hills. And the very nice lady said, of course there were. There always are this time of year. I had no idea because I had never looked up. So when I tell you that, the reason that I say it is look up. You will be stunned at what is in our backyards, in our skies, in our neighborhood. You don't have, all the birds in this book are from Central Texas. You can go to the parks, and some of them I've seen at parks, but a bunch of them are out of my backyard. And it is absolutely stunning how many things are out there that we're simply not aware to look at.
The photos in this book are beautiful. Is this book for sale?
This book is for sale. Come up after we finish, and I've got signed copies. And frankly, it's really hot. So if y'all would take them so I don't have to carry them home, that would be lovely. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Have you photographed the, I don't know if they're parakeets or parrots or what they are? Wow, over by the intramural fields.
Yes, sir.
Mark.
I have. They're called monk parakeets. And there's a bunch of them. They were introduced. They're non-native, but they were introduced, and they're gorgeous birds. They're a good addition to our community, and I've written actually about them, called A Welcome Invader. On the photos that I've passed out, there's a little QR code. Unfortunately, we all know what QR codes if we've been to a restaurant in the last 2 years. If you'll scan that with your phone, it'll take you to my website. And if you look on there, you'll see a lot of things, not least of which is the piece that I wrote about monk parakeets. Yes, ma'am. Oh, beautiful. I'm glad. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Have you ever found anything good to say about a grackle?
Good question.
You know who asked me that the first time was an Episcopalian vicar. And as a matter of fact, I thought it was a grackle. It turned out not to be a grackle. It was a blackbird. But I wrote about it yesterday. And so the answer to your question, oddly enough, is yes. And it's a question of perspective. I've lived in Texas my whole life. I understand from grackles, okay? And I've had my car whitewashed and the whole thing. Generally not a fan. However, that's when there's scores of them roosting in a tree above your car over at Central Market. Right. If instead you see one and the light's hitting it just right, and you look at its eye, and you see how a black bird has purple and green and blue and gray. They're gorgeous, one at a time. So, yes, there is something nice that can be said about a grackle. Yes, sir.
So you're out and you see over in the woods and everything else. How many times do you actually recognize a bird? Percentage-wise, how many times you go, take that picture and look it up and figure out what it was?
So when I started, it was 0 and 100. Well, not quite 0. I knew a cardinal and I knew a blue jay. I am not an ornithologist. I am not trained in any kind of, well, anything, biology, writing, none of it, which is why I'm now a professional.
Why the hell are you training? That's right. Because Tesla won't call you back.
So I started from scratch, and I've learned quite a bit. And now I'm pretty good at recognizing the birds, most of them. I will confess, with these eyes, it's a lot easier to snap a photo and to look at the photo than it is to try and catch them live. But after a while, I'm now at a point where I hear as much as I see, and I recognize things that way, but it's a process. Yes, thank you. It's a good question. Okay, you're not going to like the answer.
Repeat the question.
The question was, what's the best place in Austin for birds and bird photography? And the sad answer is it's called the Hornsby Bend Water Treatment Plant. Birds, let's just say birds eat bugs. Where do bugs come from? What you've got out there, in its defense, there are some actually quite lovely trails that are kind of around that are quite nice, but there are big open ponds, we call them, and many bugs live on and around those ponds, and the birds like to eat them. But particularly during the winter, Austin sits on the north-south migratory route, and we are right on the border between North America's western birds and North America's eastern birds. So we get way more than we, quote, deserve by virtue of our location. So if you go out there in December, those ponds will be absolutely covered with migratory birds. And in spring, particularly April, May timeframe, you'll see things that are flying up from South America, Central America, Mexico. That place is very, very rich, really is. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Do you travel? Do you travel and take pictures?
Ah, yes.
And where is like your favorite place to go to take pictures?
That's a great question. So I just wrote, my second book is coming out this fall. And thank you. And it's called The Avian Rebbe Stretches His Wings. And it's about getting out of the confines of just Central Texas. So in the last year, I went out to Big Bend. I've gone down to the brush country of George West. I've been up to the Dallas area. I've been in left Texas, I call it. But I actually just got back from Spain and Portugal. And I've made 2 trips up to the mountains in Colorado that are just spectacular. So there's a whole wide world out there.
Okay.
I'm sure if you have other questions for Eric, he's right here.
Yeah.
So come on down. And please, before you go out the door, think about who you're going to invite next week. Because we have a great lineup of speakers, and we can always use more friends, right? And if there's nothing else for the good of Rotary, we're adjourned.